field, so we're going to go down it. So we ended up doing about 5 miles or so, but it was really nice, and I'll put a link to its location on Google Maps. We drove to a park. After that, we grabbed a bike, and we rode on the lakefront bike trail up to the causeway. Now this causeway goes out into Lake Champlain, and it was about 7 miles from where we parked the Jeep to the end of the causeway, and then 7 miles back. It was unbelievably beautiful. You really get the feeling like you're in the middle of Lake Champlain. In the summertime and on the shoulder seasons, only on the weekends, there's a shuttle boat that takes you from the causeway to an island that was about 200 yards away. But we were there on a Thursday, so because the ferry wasn't running. And again, a link to the pictures are in the show notes. I'll put a link on how we plan our trips to the video on YouTube, so you can see how we planned it. Because this causeway we found a couple years ago, we threw a pin on it on the map, and here we are loving it. And we would definitely go back to see this place. So the next day, we said goodbye to our hosts. We drove to Lake Bomoseen KOA in Vermont. If you watched the video on how we make our plans for these trips, you know that KOAs are the last of our choices. But they were doing a promotion of buy one night, get one night free. So we figured, sure, we'll do that. So instead of $80 for 2 nights, it was 40. We got to the site. We set up. We did laundry. And some housekeeping stuff like that. The next day we went to Mount Moosilmaloo and did a 5.5 mile beautiful hike. The next morning we paddled on Lake Bomoseen for an hour or so. The campground had a launch in the back of it right onto the lake, so that was really convenient. We then drove another hour and a half to Randolph, Vermont, to our next Boondockers Welcome location. We met our really welcoming hosts. If you guys are listening, hey. They explained that Vermont has the second lowest population of all the states in the United States. Now, I knew Wyoming was the lowest. I assumed like Delaware because it's tiny, Rhode Island because it's tiny, would have the second lowest, but nope, it is Vermont. You drive around the Northeast Kingdom and you can see how empty the state is. But we were surprised by Vermont. We really liked Vermont. We plugged in our 30 amp to their shore power. We headed over to the Lucky Bugger Winery, which was like 5 minutes away. We wanted to buy a bottle of wine and sit and have a glass, but the owner of the winery explained that his type of license in Vermont, you can either buy a glass or a sample, but if you buy a bottle, you can't open it up on the premises. Very, very strange. So we got a couple of glasses. We enjoyed the view. And then from there, we took a ride to the only floating bridge east of the Mississippi. It's in Brookfield, Vermont. There's a link to the pictures in the show notes. It was pretty cool to see. We were kind of expecting like a rickety bridge, and apparently that's what it was a few years ago, and then it fell apart, and they replaced it, and you walk across it. We drove the Jeep across it, and you didn't feel it move at all. But pretty cool to see. That's what we love about RVing. Seeing all these great little things. So the next day we went over to Woodstock, Vermont. We walked around and looked at some of the expensive stores for a couple of hours. But more so, we really enjoyed looking at the architecture. We love looking at old houses as we walked the streets. We then saw that there's a Billings Rockefeller property. It's a national park. We had really no interest on visiting the museum. I'm sure a lot of you were shaking your heads at us, but that's how we roll. But we did walk a lot of their old carriage trails for about 2 hours or so. Really a beautiful place. We got back to our rig. We sat on our host deck with them. We shared a glass of wine and a lot of travel stories. This is why we love Boondockers Welcome. The people we meet, getting, free nights and all that, it's wonderful. And really, that's why we joined. We figured it was going to be a lot less expensive. But I'll tell you what, it's the people that we meet along the way. We've made lifelong friends from a lot of our hosts, and these folks are definitely on that list, that's for sure. The next morning we packed up, and then we talked with the host for another half hour or so about travels and life. We then pulled out of their driveway. We were leaving Vermont. We noticed on the calendar that we were in Vermont for a week and a half, and we really enjoyed that amount of time in this state. So out of that week and a half, we noticed that we had 2 nights in the campground, and one of those was free. And I was wrong about the price of $40 earlier. It was $54 with taxes to stay at the KOA a night. So instead of $108 for 2 nights, or a week and a half stay in Vermont cost us $54 in campground stays. And the rest of the nights were free at Boondockers Welcome. There's links to the show notes, folks. There's also a discount link if you are interested in joining Boondockers Welcome or Harvest Hosts, which we are also members of. So that got me curious. So Trish went through our calendars and stuff, and she found out that in the past 3 years, we've stayed at over 90 locations of Boondocker Welcome locations for a total of almost 200 nights. So if you think about it, if each of those nights was $50, 200 nights, $5,000 in 3 years. And we now have friends in Vermont, Nova Scotia, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Canada, New Brunswick. It's great. We love it. So we drove 2 hours south to White Birch Campground in Waverly, Massachusetts. It's a Passport of America location. So we got the site for half price. We met our camp host and her boyfriend, who were really wonderful people. We set up, we hopped in the Jeep, and we drove over to Poet's Seat Tower. We heard about this place. We thought had an interesting name, so we drove over. We did a short hike, and we said we're coming back to do more of the hiking here. In the show notes, I have a link to the pictures of Poet's Seat Tower. We got back to our rig, and our camp host dropped off a load of firewood for us. Pro bono, or that's not the Latin term for free. That's the Latin term. The next day we drove over to Greenfield, and we hiked back over to Poet's Seat Tower and Sachem's Head. Really scenic hike that follows a ridge line, and to get up to Sachem's Head, which was a bold rock with a view, there was a little bit of scrambling. There was a rope tied into the rocks that you could use for assistance. And that was only a quarter mile or so, and there was another longer trail that took you around, so you didn't have to do that. Again, I'll put up a link to the pictures. So we ended up doing about a 5-mile hike, but it was, once you got to the top, you just followed the ridgeline, so it was a really easy 5 miles. After that, we hopped in the Jeep and we headed over to Pekarski's Sausage in Deerfield, Ma. Delicious German meats, and I'll put a link in there. We found the store last year. So last year, 2020, we bought this rig secondhand from a guy in Massachusetts, and the first night after we picked it up, we stayed at this campground. We found this sausage place. So we stocked up on some meats. And let's see. After that, we went over to Northampton. One word. Northampton. We walked around this great little city. We were really impressed with it. A lot of every kind of restaurant you would ever want to try is in this town. We stopped into a place called the Tunnel Bar for a drink. I'll put a link into the show notes for it. The bar is located in an old pedestrian tunnel that was once used for the railroad that runs right behind the bar. Half of the railroad tracks were replaced with a rail trail, or rails to trails, or a bike path, whatever you want to call it. So we left knowing we will be back to this town. So the next morning we packed up the rig, we drove over to Walmart, just over by Northampton. We took the bike off of the back of the Jeep. We left the rig and the Jeep in Walmart's parking lot, hopped on the bike trail which ran right past the Walmart, and rode back into Northampton. We hit some great shops. We had lunch, which was delicious. And we then rode back to the Jeep and put the bike back on the Jeep, and we drove over to Fernwood Forest Campground. I'll put a link to their location on Google Maps. Nice little campground.